what are you wearing?
I'm Cat the NES monk.
Oh gosh, you used my credit card again, didn't you?
I feel that's not important. Can you help me set this thing up or what? See? It's Super Mario! Exactly the way that you remember. It sounds fine.
No, it doesn't.
This thing is cheap. I mean real cheap. They couldn't even get the square wave duties right on it. But since my cat wasted all my money on this thing, I'm gonna have to hack it open and make something cool out of it now.
Alright, now while that skip might have been fun, it's now time to get down to business. Today we're going to be turning this Yobo, which is an NES on a chip, or clone console, into a portable handheld that anybody can use on the go. First we're going to tear it down, take a look at what makes this thing tick on the inside, and then we're going to build a few more circuits to make it run portably, and then design a really cool case. Probably using the original case. We might be able to fit everything inside of here. I'm going to try that. Alright, so getting more in depth with the Yobo, we've taken it apart now and we can see that there's actually 3 boards to this thing. Not a lot to it. There's the controller board right here, which takes the controller inputs. There's the main board, which has the brains of the unit. On the other side is just a glop top. And then up here we have the audio, video, and power supply circuits. Very simple. Now over here you can see I have a second Yobo, which I fried. Actually, this was my original Yobo. Unfortunately, I assumed that, like this one, it had a power regulator inside of it. It does not. I should have taken it apart first. However, so I ended up hooking up 12 volts to it thinking that it was going to step it down. It did not. I made the magic smoke come out and now it's dead. As you can see though, these are the same system, but the boards are actually pretty different. For example, this one's missing the voltage regulator, and the main board's actually a lot smaller. Looks like in later revisions they were able to get the boards down really small, but they also decided to remove a lot of other things in order to cut costs. So they just kind of hoped that you were going to put in exactly the right amount of voltage, and that would be it. They actually super glued the power LED just onto the case. It was just completely encased in super glue, whereas this one has an actual board for it. So yeah, well, the circuitry's a little bigger on this one. It's actually better quality, whereas this one is much smaller but worse quality. Though, if it were me, I would still want to work with the smaller board, but that ship has long sailed. So we're going to work with this one, and I think we can still do some really cool stuff with it. So let's start taking it apart further and seeing what we can do.
Now, the first order of business is going to be removing this bulky controller board. Eventually we'll remove the audio and video board as well, but for now we're going to get rid of this one. See how much space that freed up? I eventually ended up wiring the controllers directly to the motherboard and jumping pin 1 and 2 so that we can get power directly without a switch. This is a rechargeable battery pack that I bought from the internet. I took it apart, and it's really cool because it actually outputs 12 volts, which is exactly what I need to power the LCD for this unit. But it also has USB, which means I can draw 5 volts to power the main unit and the audio board. And speaking of the audio board, we might as well talk about the sound emulation problem we were having with Mario earlier.
And now it's time for Tony's Tech Tips.
I noticed earlier in the video that the Yobo was having some issues reproducing the sound of Super Mario Bros. Correctly. Well, it's not the only game that it's having that issue with. The problem actually lies in the way the sound hardware was implemented in the clone console. To understand this better, we're going to take a look at how the sound actually works in the NES proper. Now, the Rico 2803, which is actually just 6502 modified, generates its own sound from within the chip. It's capable of playing up to 5 channels of sound at once, all of them mono, which means there's no left and right separation, it's just one signal. And it is capable of having a unique type of waveform depending on which channel you're using. So channels 1 and channel 2 are both going to be pulse waves or square waves. Channel 3 is a triangle wave that's usually used as bass notes and sound effects in some games. Channel 4 is going to be noise. That's also used a lot for sound effects, percussion, that kind of thing. And channel 5 is DPCM. Those are essentially just a type of compressed waveform. Think of, like the drums from Super Mario Bros. 3. Now, Now, the issue that the Yobo was having is going to lie within its two pulse wave channels, specifically their duty cycle settings. The duty cycle is basically the amount of time in which a signal is active. So if you have a duty cycle of 25%, it's active 25% of the time and inactive for the remaining 75% of that cycle. Now, normally we would calculate this using the mathematical formula duty cycle equals pulse width over time. However, we don't really need to worry about this too much because the NES is actually only capable of producing 4 predefined duty cycles: 12.5%, 25%, 50%, which is what that's supposed to sound like, and 75%, which sounds functionally identical to the 25%. Now, why is all of this important? Well, the reason is that the Rico 2803 actually stores all of the information that it needs to generate the waveforms and all of the sound data inside of registers inside of the system memory. Specifically, we are only interested though in the following two registers, 4000 and 4004 in hexadecimal, of course. These locations are where the byte used to determine the square duty cycle is stored for pulse channels 1 and pulse channel 2 respectively. Now, like I just mentioned, this is defined using a byte, which as we know consists of 2 bits, 00, 01, 10, 11. Those are your options. Now, whoever implemented the sound hardware into the Yobo managed to flip a 1 and a 0 somewhere, and they got selection 1 and selection 2 backwards. So that means the 50% square duty and the 25% square duty are actually reversed. So any game that's using either one of those two is gonna have their sound not quite the way that you remember it. Somebody literally just got a 1 and a 0 backwards somewhere. There's literally nothing we can do to fix this. It's a fault within the hardware chips themselves. It's actually really annoying, but it is what it is. At least now we understand why it's happening.
So I decided to start some work on the case so I can attach the LCD and the controller bezel. I'm using a Dremel tool in order to cut some lines that I drew to make space for the parts to go on. I'll be attaching them with some Bondo and some plastic epoxy, then sanding and painting. Here we are in the parking lot of my apartment, getting ready to paint the top half of the case. As you can see, this is how the case looks with all the parts attached. I've put on the controller plate, I put on the LCD, I put on the LCD controls, and the slot for the charging jack and the power button. I also moved the reset button to the top of the unit because that's where I ultimately want to have it. I didn't have room for it on the front anymore. I'll be doing a white coat first, and then I'll be doing some red to match the bottom of the case, but only on certain parts. I'll tape off the rest. Now as for the bottom half, I cut out a hole here because I'm going to eventually be feeding the cartridge slot out the back of it. Day 2 of painting. The white coat has dried overnight, and now we are ready to add some red details to this case. The red turned out really cool. It's almost a perfect match to the original plastic that was used on the bottom half of the case. I'm happy with how it turned out. I used my Cricut Air 2 to cut out a vinyl decal to stick on the front of the controller plate. I want to make it look more like a Famicom than an NES. And remember that bulky controller port we removed? They were kind enough to include a pinout on it so I know exactly where to wire my controllers when I attach it to the main board. We're not going to need all of these connections for a working Player 1, but since I want Player 1 and 2, we are going to use all of these lines. Player 2 uses the ones Player 1 doesn't for things like the light gun, which won't work on an LCD, but we're going to have it anyway. Plus, I just want to have multiplayer. Okay, the controller's wired to the board along with the Player 2 port, and now I am attaching it to the case. I also attached the LCD, which we got from a car backup camera. I picked up this cheap $5 USB speaker at Fry's, and man, this circuitry is tiny. I love it. I'm actually planning to swap out this big speaker for a smaller Game Boy one and attach it to a potentiometer. So here is the system most of the way wired up. Right here is the charging board from the battery. I actually removed the USB port and tapped the 5 volts off it directly. Also, you might be noticing that I attached the switch and the charging port separately with wires. That's because I put the plastic on upside down. Oops. The LCD is also attached, as well as the audio board currently, and everything is wired to the motherboard, and it runs beautifully. The very last thing I have to do before this thing is done is wire this cartridge slot to the back of the board. That's going to be 72 individual wires. Fun. Yay, one down, 71 more to go. And here's the finished unit. Doesn't it look cool? I'm really happy with how the artwork turned out on the controller. I drilled some holes into the side so you can hear the speaker a little bit better, and I attached this knob to the top of the potentiometer, which I stuck on top of the system. It looks a little silly there, but I couldn't think of anywhere else to put it. Also, the reset button got moved. I think I pointed that out, and it's got the LED in there that was originally in it, so I'm happy I was able to save that. It looks really cool. I love the blue. The controller port is now on the back, like I said I was going to. We've got the LCD controls, we've got the power switch, which now turns everything on, and the charging jack. Let's play a game. Okay, so what I'm sure most of you are noticing is that the graphics are just completely screwed up on this thing. When I attached a cartridge slot last night, everything was working perfectly, but then once I screwed the unit together, this started happening with every game that I put in, no matter what I did to it. I'm guessing a wire must be crossed or something is touching right now, but I just don't have the time to go in and debug it at the moment, unfortunately. I simply just run out of time for this build and I gotta get it in by the deadline. But I think this proves the concept, and I'm still really happy that I was able to get a working system for the most part.
So yeah, I hope you enjoyed watching me build my Yobo portable. It's unfortunate that it had those graphical glitches in the end. I just didn't have time to fix them, but it is something that's totally able to be fixed, and I probably will do so in the future so that I can actually play on this thing, because I'm pretty proud of it. These Yobo systems, they're really tiny, and they're really easy to hack. So I actually would recommend it if you're just starting out with hacking yourself. It would be a pretty good first project for anybody to get their hands dirty with building a portable. Anyways, thanks for watching and good luck to all the other contestants.